Hello and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosotris, and today I wanted to do a book review. I finished reading this book yesterday, and it was just an incredible reading experience. It would not get out of my head, and so I said, okay, you know what? We're going to do a full video reviewing Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. Now, this book came out in 2022. It's a retelling of Charles Dickens' David Copperfield, but it's set in the 90s in Appalachia. And it's really, really interesting. It's inspired by David Copperfield in that most of the characters have like an equivalent in this book, and it's always really cool seeing how the names become like translated into this world. But this book very much stands on its own. It's not like a gimmick kind of thing where the main plot is just sort of, spot the Charles Dickens references kind of thing. This book really stands on its own. So if you haven't read David Copperfield, you don't need to have read it to really enjoy this. This book takes kind of a similar approach to not social reform, but highlighting the plight of the poor and downtrodden the way Dickens did. He was a big advocate on the plight of kind of poor people in England, the workhouses, all that sort of stuff. And this book sort of does the same thing, translating it to sort of the opioid crisis, the drug crisis in Appalachian America. And the world and the voice is so beautifully realized. It sort of makes you feel both nostalgic for this place, and also it kind of spurs you to want to change everything and just help these people. But it's not a preachy book. That's one thing that this does really, really well. This book won the Pulitzer Prize. I think it shared it with another book. But it really deserved it. This book was absolutely incredible. You get pulled along, and it is very depressing in parts, but the main character has such a strong voice and such a world outlook that is so engaging and captivating that even when things get depressing, it never feels oppressive. There's some books that are just like tragedy after tragedy after tragedy, and it just is depressing for the sake of being depressing, and it just wears you down with the weight of everything that's happening, and there's no hope and there's no spark anywhere in it. And in this book, you love it because you're cheering for the main character. Even when things are going wrong, even when people are treating him badly, you want him to do better because you know he can do better. It's very much like sort of seeing a family member and they're going through a rough time, but you're like, I know you're gonna do okay. I know you're gonna come out of this all right. And you want to cheer for them. And so this book is just outstanding. If you know anything about David Copperfield, I will say it follows the overall plot fairly similarly. One thing I will say, and this isn't a spoiler, but it does follow the same kind of ending as David Copperfield. So if you know anything about the plot of David Copperfield, you know kind of how it ends. And that's not to say like don't read it because you know the ending. It's knowing how it ends will help you get through the rougher sections, because you know that things are going to turn out the way that they're supposed to. And so even when things get dark, don't give up, because this is very much a book. If I didn't know that it was based on David Copperfield, if I didn't know anything about the plot, I probably would have given up about a third of the way through, because I was just like, you know what, I can't handle this. I don't want to see this poor child struggling and suffering like this. I can't handle it. So know that things turn out the way they're supposed to, and it's okay. So that's, if you were doubting it, if you're reading it and you're like, this is so sad, keep going. I promise. One thing that Charles Dickens always used in his books was hope. If you think about, something simple like A Christmas Carol, even though Ebenezer Scrooge is an awful, terrible person, he seems really irredeemable, the thing that pulls you along is that you know that by the end of it, he's going to sort of see the error of his ways, he's going to become a better person, and it's going to be okay. Oliver Twist, you have this orphan boy who's surviving on the streets in England, and things are awful, and he's struggling to survive, and everything's terrible, but you know that in the end, he's going to be okay. And so that is definitely the thing that kept me going through all of this. This book is just incredible. Now, I use a sort of set of criteria for writing books. I used to do sort of a rating system where I'd come up with like a star rating, but I don't really like star ratings, so I won't do that anymore. But I will go over kind of the different criteria that I have for kind of what makes a book appealing to me personally. And again, this is just my opinion. It's not like, there's no way to say for sure, scientifically, this is a book that is objectively good. There's no way to really do that. There's awards you can point to, there's, accolades and stuff, but mostly it's just down to personal preference. And so these are the things that I really liked about it. Hopefully they can help you find your own opinion about whether or not you want to read it. So first off, my first criterion is, do the characters feel like real people? And this, I'd say they do, in that it's very relatable. The main character, especially at the beginning, he reminded me of me so much. There's one moment where his mother sort of rearranges all his action figures, his superhero action figures, and she arranges them by color. So all the, red, blue, green, or whatever. And he kind of looks at it and he's like, well, this is stupid because they're not organized by like what their actual team ups are, whether it's like the Fantastic Four or the Avengers or the Justice League. And it just kind of baffles him that she would, put them like that. And that was very much me as a kid. So the characters do feel like real people, but one thing that I will say about this, and this isn't a negative, but the characters feel a little heightened, which I think is good, because if everyone felt like real people, it wouldn't have that kind of Dickens fairy tale gloss to it that allows you a little bit of distance. It's very clear that these are kind of characters. Dickens was known for having kind of outrageous characters, especially in David Copperfield. You've got like Uriah Heep and Betsy Trotwood and, Mr. Murdstone, and it's, all these like larger than life kind of outrageous characters. And this book definitely does that. But I think if the characters felt too grounded in real life, it would be too depressing. The fact that everyone is sort of a little outrageous makes it feel much more like a story, and it makes it so that you are more willing to kind of engage with the characters. Now, there's a lot of this that is very grounded in reality. The characters are very relatable. The main character, he really feels like a real person that and the people that he interacts with, like, those are people that anyone who kind of has been in, small town middle America can recognize those kinds of archetypes, but they are a little exaggerated. But I think that's a good thing, because if everything was completely grounded in reality, it would be too sad. Because just the grim reality is that things are both tragic and boring, and this keeps that from being the case. You don't ever feel like this is something that you can just dismiss. It really feels immediate, and it gets inside your head. And so these characters are a little exaggerated, but it's fine, because that's what draws you into the story and keeps it from being just, trauma porn type things. I'm thinking of books like, A Little Life, that kind of thing, where it's just unrelentingly grim and sad all the time. And that's nonfiction. This one is very much aware that it's fiction, and it has that sort of Charles Dickens wackiness to allow you to sort of invest more further in the characters, because it's not so grim and depressing that your brain shuts down and says, I don't want to read this. And so it really pulls you in. So I think it's good that the characters are a little elevated, but they are still very relatable. And there's a lot of people in here you can be like, oh, yep, I know exactly that kind of person that this is talking about. And the book is also, in a sense, about stereotypes, because there's so many stereotypes about like the hillbillies and and kind of like the redneck Appalachian hill folk kind of thing, that this book is very actively speaking against. You've got things like, what is it, the Beverly Hillbillies, that old show about like these old, hayseeds who come to the big city and are baffled by modern life because they're just so ignorant, or the book like Tobacco Road, which kind of makes fun of like southern hick hillbilly types. And so this is very much about those kinds of stereotypes, and so it avoids using stereotypes in the way it depicts characters. The characters are outrageous because of their personalities and their slanted worldviews, but there is no like hillbilly stereotypes in this. This is very grounded in kind of the reality of what life is like for those people, and also the stereotypes that they're always fighting against. And the book actively engages with that in some very cool ways. So I really liked that about it. Next up, the next criterion is, did the writing style draw you in? And that is something else. This book feels very poetic and descriptive, but it's not like purple prose. There's no just like endless descriptions of things. It's very much all filtered through the main character's perceptions, and his focus is always on people, the weird things they do, and his concept of sort of what are the rules, because the rules are always changing, especially when you're going in through foster care and then you're going into school. Even things like at one point he plays football and there's different rules for that, and so he's always trying to kind of figure out what are the rules, because that's how you survive in a rough environment. And so the writing style is so captivating. It draws you in immediately. I've seen some people say that the writing style is too aware of itself and it's a little smug. I didn't really see that personally, because the world, for a large chunk of it, he's a child. For a big bit, he's maybe like between the ages of like 11 and 13. And kids have a very distinct way of looking at the world, where they really want to know, what are the rules, what is like what am I supposed to do in this given situation, and they have to know sort of everything in order to be quote unquote accepted or cool or whatever. And so there is sort of a smugness, but it's because he's a kid and he's convinced he knows all the rules and he knows how to survive. And so he feels very confident in, this is the way things are supposed to be because this is all I've ever known, kind of thing. And so I didn't really feel like it was the author being very, look at how clever I am. It's very much you're just inside the mind of a young kid who's traumatized and scared and insecure and just trying to keep everything together and not draw too much attention to himself. So I really, really, really liked the writing style. And especially once you get later on, once he gets older, the writing style gets a bit more poetic. There's this one incredible moment, I won't say what it is, but it's sort of an extended internal monologue, and it's sort of just reflecting on his life kind of thing, and it's just gorgeous. It's beautiful, but it's not like purple prose. It's not excessive. It's not just poetry for the sake of poetry. You can really follow his train of thought through this, and it's just so stunningly written. This book won the Pulitzer for a reason. The writing style is wonderful. The next criterion is, did the plot move at an appropriate pace? This is the one thing that I stumbled with in a couple places. There's a few places where it's very clear that things are going well and that things are going to change soon. And so you're just kind of waiting for things to go bad, because, you get that sense of kind of the rhythm of the thing. And so there is a couple places where it's almost like you're like, okay, come on, stop talking about how good things are. Let's just get right to the bad stuff. After you're done, you're going to really appreciate those sort of more positive moments where things were going well. But there is a couple places where the pacing does feel like it slows down, just because you're like waiting for like the blindfold to be sort of pulled from your eyes. You're like, okay, what's the catch? because that's kind of how Demon Copperhead, that's kind of how he sees everything. He's always waiting for things to go bad, and so you kind of follow his train of thought. And so there are a couple places where this works to the book's advantage, and then there's other parts where it sort of feels like it's treading water until things can get bad. So, I did sort of feel like there were some parts that slowed down a bit, but overall my experience was really good. It took me a long time to get through maybe the first third of the book, because I kind of read it in smaller chunks. At the end, I read the last 150 pages in one go. It was like a 3-hour reading session. I was like, no, I just want to finish this book. And I didn't sense any pacing issues. The pace moved at a really good clip. If you compare this to David Copperfield, it is a little bit shorter. Now, obviously, the book is a bit bigger, bigger this way. So, but it is a shorter book overall. So it really didn't feel meandering at all. You really could focus on everything. There's a couple places where I think things maybe move too fast and you're like, whoa, what's going on? But then afterwards you kind of understand what happened. So, it's very much a character book. You're following one character and his ups and downs. And so those books will always have sort of more uneven pacing because there's not really an end goal. It's not like when you're reading a fantasy and there's a goal. They're like, we have to get here, we have to do this. And so the plot kind of moves at the appropriate pace to get to that point. So for this one, I did find that there were some parts that felt a bit slower, but it didn't really affect my reading experience at all. So, that's something to be aware of. The next criterion is, were you still thinking about this after you finished it? Absolutely. I did this. I recorded a short review that I posted on YouTube, and I was a little shaken by it, by my experience reading the book. So that review is mostly just me kind of trying not to cry and talking about how much I loved it. So this book really gets in your head, and it sticks with you. It has such great things to say. It's so life-affirming, it's inspiring in parts. It really is one of those books that it changes you in a good way. I absolutely adore this. I've never read anything else by this author. Her other big book that is pretty well known is the Poisonwood Bible, and that sounds incredible, so I do want to read that one as well. She's also written a lot of nonfiction, which I'd be really encouraged to check out, because she just has a really strong narrative voice, and I really appreciate her style. So this is definitely one that I'm thinking about after I finished. The final criterion is, do I want to read it again? And I think so. This isn't one I'm gonna clamor to read it again anytime soon, but I do think, I might want to check out the audiobook version from the library in the future if I want to do a reread, just so I can have kind of a different experience with it. Especially since voice is so important to this story. It would be great to see how an audiobook narrator kind of captures Demon's voice. And so this is definitely one that I do want to read again. I'm never donating this book or anything. I loved it so much. It's staying on my shelf forever, and I'm going to rave about it to everyone that I talk to. So definitely one that I'm going to read again. And so, if I were to give this a star rating, it would be really good, but I don't really like star ratings. I think those are subjective and they pretend to be objective. I don't know. Star ratings just really aren't for me, but I utterly loved this book, would definitely recommend it to anybody. And if you have read this book, and you haven't read David Copperfield, I would say definitely give this one a go. This is my favorite Dickens novel. It's huge. There's a really good audiobook on Audible that's narrated by Richard Armitage, and he does such a good job with all the voices and everything, and it's just wonderful. But I really, really love this book, and I'm really glad to say that this book really stood up to the original. They're both equally incredible. I'd say this one is probably a little more fun to read just because of all the kind of 90s, early 2000s cultural references. So it kind of connects with you in a nostalgic sort of way if you lived through that sort of era. But this book is also amazing, and it's so good. So yes, Demon Copperhead. I feel like I'm just going to start repeating myself at this point. So I'll say, please read it, enjoy it. Tell me if you have read it. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it. If you didn't like it, I'd also love to hear your thoughts. There's no rule that says just because I loved it, you have to love it yourself, because that's, everyone's tastes are different. And this is a literary novel, and it's very character focused. So for some people, that's not their thing, and that's fine. There's no rule that says that this is like a better type of reading experience than any other genre. But this is just something that I personally really liked. So read it, tell me about it. And with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week. And in the meantime, happy reading. Bye.